Hands off Cuba. My name is David Griscom, and y'all are listening to The Jacobin Show. I'm coming to y'all from deep in the heart of Texas, Austin. Always happy to be here talking about many, many things today, including the U.S. starvation campaign, embargo, strangling campaign against the people of Cuba. We're going to be joined in just a little bit by Alex Skopic, a associate editor at Current Affairs, who was, along other people, part of this movement, this caravan into Cuba to bring much needed relief and aid. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about how that made a lot of people very upset that certain figures were participating in a humanitarian movement to make sure that children have medicine. But Matt Leck, my good friend, super producer, and brother in all things, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, David. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man. I mean, we got a big episode. I mean, this Cuba thing is really important. It is so insane. All of the kind of nasty smears that all of the folks who participated in this got. Obviously, Hasan being one of them, but also just kind of like bizarre stuff about, these leftists like living in a life of luxury while people are starving. The United States government is the one that is creating this crisis, right? So if you're so worried about like the on the ground conditions of Cubans, advocate against Donald Trump and this insane attempt by him to kind of choke off the island from power and modern civilization.
Yeah. The why do you love the regime so much? Response isn't quite flying as well as I think they hoped, when you realize, like, you're the one who cares. You're the one who wants to starve those people. You're the one who wants those hospitals dark because you don't like the government of a country off of the Florida, a few hundred miles off the Florida coast. You want to change their political leadership, literally regime change. And as like the guy told Ryan Grimm on Newsmax, okay, I understand that babies are dying, but I'm supposed to believe that the Newsmax guy thinks that's a price he's willing to pay so they can vote every 4 years? I'm supposed to believe any of these people care about democracy when they actually want to roll it up even here and lie about our elections at home? Of course, they're doing it because they just want to see the people of Cuba cast a ballot now and then. I mean, it's ridiculous.
No, I mean, it is terrible. And with Alex, we're going to talk about many of these kind of defamations, honestly, let's call it, that the people who participated in that have been receiving, along with a report from the ground there. But I mean, Matt, we're talking about democracy, so why don't we talk about democracy? I love democracy. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's something that's worth defending and protecting. Unfortunately, in this country, we are seeing that the rich and the powerful don't seem to be that committed to democracy. And look, democracy is messy. It's complicated, but there's some kind of basic tenets in it, right? Obviously, citizens need to have the right to vote, right? You need to have equality before the law. And one of them that I think even children know is that you need to have a thing called freedom of speech. If you want to have a democracy, you need to be able to, as our friends on the right say, engage in a free exchange of ideas. And over the past decade, we have seen an all-out panic from the right who keep on claiming that their rights to freedom of speech have been restricted and have been prevented, right? And, I do think that, like, as people on the left, we should always be advocating for the protection of speech because we are the first ones who will see that right taken back. And people like our good friend Ben Burgess have been, I think, writing very presciently about that for a long time. Obviously, the late, great Michael Brooks, too, was somebody who was always very adamant about this. And what we've seen now, obviously, with the attacks on student protesters against the genocide in Gaza, and what we're seeing now, what we're going to talk about now, is that this attack on free speech has always been something that has been mostly targeted on people who are willing to criticize the United States government, and particularly willing to criticize the genocide in Gaza and the state of Israel. We have another unfortunate chapter to add to the right wing's war on free speech. And it is unfortunately very close to me. At Texas State, Idris Robinson, who is a professor of philosophy there, was fired from their position for speaking about Gaza, for speaking about Palestine. And he was targeted by pro-Israel activists to push him out of his position. Now, I will just note to the Jacobin audience, if you are not familiar, if you don't watch our other program, Left Reckoning, we have interviewed and advocated a lot for another professor at Texas State University, Tom Alter. Tom Alter, who was a tenured professor, was fired for speaking in his own capacity as a private citizen at something called a socialism conference, right? Something that, as an American citizen, you have a right to participate in politics in any capacity, right? But there's a pressure by a literal neo-Nazi, somebody who has said, quote, I believe that Hitler went to heaven. And the Texas State University fired him from his tenured position for that. That was absolutely chilling. And seeing it happen again in short time following that is something that really should raise the alarm bells about what is happening, not just at the institution of Texas State, but what is happening at universities across the country. And unfortunately, I think in states like Texas, we are getting the worst of it. So Idris Robinson, who again is a professor of philosophy, has now sued Texas State University, in my opinion, rightfully so, because claiming that they have violated his constitutional rights. Just to make this as clear as possible, we have seen a crackdown from the right about what is taught in the classroom. Right, we've seen the kind of ridiculous example how at Texas A&M, I don't know if you saw this, Matt, how a philosophy professor as well was challenged and targeted because they were teaching Plato. You don't have to have a background in philosophy to understand that that's pretty foundational to philosophy, political philosophy. The understanding of Western civilization, I think, something that the right is always warning that is under threat. They were challenged because they were teaching Plato, and the claim was from the right was that this got into questions of gender and gender ideology, which again, if you want to live in a free and open society, if you want to be able to sit in a philosophy class, you better well be able to talk about things like that.
Yeah, as opposed to the communist dictatorships like in Cuba, we have free speech in this country.
Yeah, no, we have total free speech. I bring this up though to say, like, and that's just one example. There's so many examples of what's happening at universities in Texas and all across the country for sure. I bring this up to say, like, that is an institutional setting, and that is wrong, what we're seeing. But both Alter and Professor Robinson are being targeted for activities that they are engaging in as individual private citizens. In Idris Robinson's case, he went and he spoke at a conference as a private individual, not as a representative of the university, in North Carolina. Right. And it was a political conference, and he was talking about questions like a philosopher or a free person in a free society, an intellectual might, that are kind of complicated, right, and interesting. He was talking about violence, right? And if anybody knows anything about political philosophy, that is a main category. That's something that you talk about a lot, right? Because it does matter, right? Does the state have the right to enact violence on its own citizens? Does the state have the right to enact violence on non-citizens? Who is a citizen? Do citizens have the right to enact violence on the state, right? These are questions that you're going to engage with if you are a free-thinking individual. I bring all this up to say, again, this is somebody who is not even participating in classroom discussions who's being targeted. This is somebody who, as a private citizen, is engaging in conversations publicly, yes, but as an individual, as a free individual in a supposedly free society. And we are seeing that being used as grounds to fire somebody for it. It is degrading to our intellectual development as a nation, right? As a country, as Texans, to see this kind of nonsense coming from those in power. But it is also a direct threat to the very basic principles of government and of a free society. Because if we're now saying that it's acceptable for us, for those in power, to limit the conversations that we're allowed to have as free individuals, as private citizens, we have opened up the door for all forms of control. And there's a reason that they kind of target figures like this. There's a reason, that this is where they want to make their stand, because they think most people say, like, oh, well, violence, that's a kind of a touchy subject. Maybe you shouldn't be talking about something like that. No, you absolutely should. You should. This is like a fundamental aspect of, let's call it Western society, something that they are always saying is under threat, that we should be able to talk about controversial subjects if we want to live and maintain and continue to live in a free society. So this is just another example of the far right and the people in power, you call them whatever you want, war on this on American democracy. Total solidarity with Idris Robinson as they kind of fight for their job. It is truly worrying because there is always a hope. Let me throw to you, Mag. I have more to say, but I don't want to talk over you.
I mean, in the context of Anthony Blinken being at Harvard and being asked about why he allowed the south of Gaza to go on, it's worth dwelling on the fact that we have such an infantilized understanding of political violence in this country that really isn't anti-violence, it's anti-questioning a dominant form of violence. So Blinken gets asked about how couldn't you do any more, and he says, well, Israel was going to, quote, they would have continued to do what they did because of the trauma of October 7th. And that justifies violence for folks following along at home. And it does so by ignoring any sort of understanding of why violence might have happened on October 7th. It didn't, to quote Kamala Harris, fall out of a coconut tree. There's actually an entire history that preceded that. And we need to, as citizens of a country that is supposed to be a democracy, but instead looks like a war machine that is like unrestrainable, that multiple times in my lifetime and even right before my lifetime engaged in wars that amounted to giant crimes against humanity under pretext of lies. So yes, we should have a more mature understanding of this. We shouldn't be having Republican politicians or frankly Democrat ones telling us how exactly what our manners should be when discussing things like conflict in the Middle East.
And, let's just be really blunt about this. And I don't mean to be alarmist, but I think people need to recognize and educate themselves and prepare themselves for how to defend these very simple principles of American society and American democracy, because they are under threat. And, most of us have kind of lost the capacity or the ability to engage in these things because we critique a lot of the fantasies of the American system. But you will miss those protections when they are gone, because this goes beyond just like the ability to have controversial conversations as a private individual. This is part of a total crackdown on labor, a total crackdown on the university systems, and the chilling effects go much deeper than just whether or not you're able to go and speak at a radical conference and talk about revolution and things like that. Because why do you think that this would stop there? I mean, if they think that they can get away with this, the next kind of push will be like, oh, they're pushing political indoctrination in their classroom because they spoke positively about a political figure, an American, within the kind of limited context of even like the American discourse. Or, why not think that like, hey, it seems like there's not any pushback against this kind of stuff. Why don't we start looking at the donation history of like certain figures and faculty that we don't like and we want to remove from their position, right? This has a chilling effect that goes beyond just like, oh, I might be targeted, but also says, hey, you know what? Do I want to help out like the immigrant justice group at my university as a professor, sponsor them, help guide them, do that kind of important work? Maybe not. ICE might come for me, right? This is a threat, and it goes beyond even just speech. It is like a very clear indication that they're watching and they're willing to kind of use whatever tools that they have to enforce a certain level of compliance. And we've seen, unfortunately, from Texas universities, which I know the best, all too much willingness to kind of play along with this insanity that they've been getting from the right. So we'll be continuing to watch this on this program because it's a very, very serious threat.
I'll just note one more thing is we're already past a pretty insane point of no return, and some people might not notice it because, they don't identify with a person like Ramesa Ozturk. They should be able to, because all that she did wasn't even to call for divestment from her university, Tufts, from Israel, but was to say the community student union or the community union senate voted to do that, and the administration shouldn't ignore that. And she was detained. I mean, I have to look up how long she was because there's been so many, political imprisonments, but detained by federal immigration forces for that. I mean, the sort of pretense that particularly people on the right have about how we have freedom of speech in this country, like, let's prove it.
Yeah. No, and like, look, I'm gonna make a pivot to another moment in our history. But as people know, my book, The Myth of Red Texas, gets into Texas's radical history, and it is very, very pertinent to what we're facing right now. Texas had one of the largest socialist parties in the country, and guess how they broke it? Guess how they broke it? They broke it by restricting and preventing them from distributing their newspaper because they called it seditious, because it argued against engagement with World War I. And overnight, you saw a country that supposedly had democracy. And again, 1900 democracy was pretty ugly, but man, it was way worse when they just were effectively banning political opposition that they didn't want to deal with anymore. Overnight, you saw a kind of criminalization of being a socialist in the state of Texas. And 100 years later, we're still trying to kind of rebuild that movement because it was so effectively crushed. So when we talk about how bad things can get and how quickly they can get, there is historical precedent for it, which is why it's more important than ever to be engaged, to organize yourself, and to, get reconnected with our history. I have a new piece up from the book in Jacobin where I tell a different kind of story. There's many gunfights in Texas's history, but I wanted to tell a different one. I talk about Grimes County, Texas, which is a county that went, I believe, 80% for Donald Trump in 2024. Well, back in the day, it was a hotbed of populism. And how did they defeat it? They sparked up all kinds of white supremacist violence to break it down. But versus so many of the other gunfights where people are fighting over gold or treasure or honor, I thought it would be interesting to tell a different kind of story, which is the story of a white populist sheriff and his black deputies who faced down the KKK and the white man's union as they were trying to reinstate white supremacist rule in Grimes County. You could read that excerpt in Jacobin. You can pick up the book at OR Books. I'll be at Brownsville, Texas later today. Next week, Wednesday, I'm going to be in Dallas at Wild Detectives. Really looking forward to that. San Antonio in the near future, Austin, and New Orleans with Nathan Robinson and the good folks at Current Affairs in April as well. But without further ado, let's talk about Cuba. We have Alex Skopic from Current Affairs Associate Editor talking about their trip there. I appreciate all of y'all, and we'll see you very soon. I'm very honored to be joined by Associate Editor of Current Affairs, Alex Skopic, who we had on my other program, Left Reckoning, last week before him and many other people traveled to Cuba, an island which is under an incredibly dangerous and damaging American blockade that is causing losses of life. Alex, thank you so much for coming on the Jacobin Show.
Oh, David, thanks for having me. I say always happy to come on the Jacobin Show.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really happy to be able to have you on here and to talk about this. Look, we're going to get into some of the kind of sparkly social media nonsense that we've gotten from the American press, though I don't want to trivialize it. Actually, I think it's really nasty, and there's a reason that they do it. But before we get into that, I wanted to kind of just talk to you about your experience going to Cuba. I mean, maybe just start, on a personal level, if you don't mind. Was this the first time that you've been to the island? What was it that kind of struck you when you landed and saw what life is like there?
Yeah, first time in Cuba, first time in any Latin American country, actually. I'd heard about this mission for a couple of months. Initially it was modeled after the Gaza, the Sumud flotilla, which is the big boat flotilla bringing aid. And then apparently they got so much interest that they converted it to a convoy model, where you just, whether it's by boat or by plane or whatever method, just show up in Havana with supplies. It's both shockingly easy to get to Cuba. It's 90 miles away. It's less than an hour by plane. And then when you get there, it's just what we have done to that country is almost undescribable.
Yeah, I mean, well, tell me a little bit about what you were able to see on the ground. I mean, because on one hand, you're experiencing Cuba in a very particular set of circumstances, right? After kind of being choked off, one long term, obviously by America, but especially ramped up under Trump recently. So I imagine you probably kind of had conflicting experiences of one, just seeing maybe the long time resilience of the country, but two, probably seeing some of the horrors of this this strangling attempt by Donald Trump. So could you talk a little bit about what is going on today and what it is that Trump is doing to Cuba?
Yes. So the American government has been sanctioning and blockading and placing embargoes on Cuba since the early 1960s. Like ever since Castro's revolution in 59, we've just immediately clamped down on them with sanctions policy. So that part of it is not new. But what is new is that January 29th, Trump put out one of his many executive orders and decreed that, and the language of it is really, the language in all of Trump's executive orders is insane, but this one in particular, I encourage people to read because he is just completely out in the open about his intent to cause as much suffering as possible. The language is something like, any country which sells or otherwise provides any oil, of any kind for any reason, will be slapped with really harsh tariffs and sanctions and economic penalties. So it's a de facto ban on shipping any fuel whatsoever to Cuba. It's insane.
And I mean, let's also just be very explicit here for anybody who's confused. This isn't Trump saying, hey, America, we're not going to sell oil to Cuba. This is Trump saying, hey, Mexico, you're not allowed to. Any other country being able to trade with it. So it's one of those things where not only, is America, which is, the closest country, to Cuba, it is, a massive economic, power that cutting it off initially is already kind of damaging to Cuba. This is him saying, hey, we're going to isolate you from the rest of the world, not just in terms of being a member of the global community or some kind of romantic thing like that. Literally saying hey, we're not going to allow you to have fuel to kind of power your society to keep the lights on. Right. I mean, it's just the absurdity of it, of just saying that not, this isn't American policy. This isn't American relationships with Cuba, but basically dictating to the world that this is the way that it's going to go.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. The American oil companies were banned from trading with Cuba all the way back in 1961 or so. This is saying to Mexico, to Russia, to China, to basically every other nation on earth, dictating to them who they may and may not trade with. It's not just a threat to Cuba, it's a threat to every other country's economic sovereignty.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there's an aspect to this that obviously, the focus needs to be on alleviating the suffering of the Cuban people. But there is an aspect to this that actually, in many ways goes beyond just, Trump's kind of acceleration of it. But the United States kind of isolating Cuba and punishing the Cuban people for decisions that they've made, right? I mean, whatever opinions you have about the Cuban government, I'll tell you that whatever system they have there is more legitimate than kind of rule by Donald Trump, D.C., right? There's no legitimacy there.
Yeah. No, for real. The people always say, well, Cuba is an authoritarian state. Cuba is a dictatorship. And that's complicated and debatable. I mean, there are elements where there's issues with civil rights and civil society. There's censorship. There's things like that. But we also have those here. We have had masked ICE agents rounding up college students for the crime of writing op-eds. So it's a sort of, glass houses situation with the authoritarianism. And regardless, and one of the points we make in our newest article is that the question of what kind of government Cuba has is completely irrelevant to the question of whether it is legitimate to starve them. They could have the worst government in the world.
No, totally.
And it wouldn't be legitimate to completely deny them cooking fuel.
Well, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the mission, because you talk about the aid that was brought in and your kind of experience, seeing it distributed, what was needed, and how are people getting by in Cuba?
Yeah. So it's so rough. Like, and this was like really the value of going there in person and filming things. And because, you see in the news reports, fuel has been blockaded or that sanctions have been put in place on this or that, on medical supplies. And I feel like people don't understand what it really means on a human level. Mm-hmm. And, I keep thinking
how so on the human level, just to kind of paint a picture.
Well, so for example, like some of the things we saw in Havana, they've got trash piling up in the street, like mountains of it, just loose trash, stinks terribly, covered in flies, because they can't get the fuel and they can't run the garbage trucks. I think while we were there, we saw one garbage truck, and they were just overwhelmed by trying to collect it all. And worse than that, you then see people picking through the mountains of trash with sticks, trying to find like an aluminum can they can sell or like anything they can use. And when we went to the hospitals, when we were at the Salvador, I have a little video somewhere, but I went to the Salvador Allende Memorial Hospital in Havana. And we were there when one of the Puerto Rican delegation brought in like 10 or so of these big suitcases full of antibiotics and like painkillers and different medicines. And you could just see on the doctors' faces, like when they brought them in, like how relieved they were, because they just hadn't been able to get this stuff for weeks or months. And they have patients just sitting there in pain. Like it's... Mm-hmm. I keep thinking about, like, that quote from Anthony Bourdain, like, once you've been to Cambodia, you'll never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death. Like, I have thought about that a lot recently, and like, just swap in the words Marco Rubio.
Yeah.
And there we are.
No, and I mean, the reporting that I've read from y'all, and I was also heard from others who went. I mean, really painted a picture of a country that was already suffering again before this ramped up effort. But I mean, this is it's hard to kind of talk about this as anything other than like a form of warfare, right? Because this is something that is causing civilian deaths, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's been there've been some conflicting reports coming out about specific incidents, like whether or not people on ventilators may have died already. I've seen conflicting information about that. But you think about things like food. People can't refrigerate their food, and so they're probably eating meat and fish that's gone off and getting sick. Things like that are happening all over the island. So it would be a miracle if there hadn't been deaths by now.
Yeah, and so could you talk about like how things are being prioritized in Cuba right now? I mean, when it comes to things like rationing, I mean, like how is this kind of society trying to cope with this terrible oil shock?
Yeah. Well, they're doing the best they can. And we talked to I'm blanking on his name now, but the deputy foreign minister who talked about some of this. And he said, obviously they're taking the small amount of resources they do have and putting them to the most vital buildings, hospitals, schools, care centers for the elderly, things like that. And then they are really trying to ramp up alternatives for energy. Like they're heavily into solar, just out of necessity now. And the Chinese have been shipping them lots and lots of solar panels. I think the stat I've seen is that they're up to, depending on who you ask, somewhere between 11 and 20% of their total electric needs are now being met by solar. But it's triage and it's coping mechanisms and it's cobbling things together
and intermittent. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
there's issues with how long those kind of sources of power last. No, I mean it is truly horrendous. I mean, could you talk a little bit about what the experience was like, though? Being a part of this international group of people who are showing up for the Cuban people, maybe on like a human level, what the experience was like. Being able to speak and spend time with folks in Cuba who are seeing that, like, while yes, like the American government is waging war on them, there are many people out there who are horrified about what's happening and hope for a different and better world.
Yeah. No, the people we met in Cuba were like uniformly incredible. And these are people who are not rich and powerful. They're mostly young activists, like the people from DSA, people from different international groups. I know there were some people there from the MST, the Landless Peasants movement in Brazil. Lots of different delegations. I mean, the Puerto Ricans, like, incredible, because Puerto Rico itself doesn't have much, in the way of wealth and resources, and they still showed out for Cuba. But yeah, and everybody had their little side projects, like the delegation itself, like the mission itself, brought these huge shipments of aid, like in big like crates and boxes and duffel bags. But like everybody I spoke to had brought, had lined their suitcase with Tylenol, or the one guy, Gerard from DSA, his whole, I talk about him in the article, but his whole thing was solar panels, and he had stuffed 2 suitcases full. He did a little crowdfunder, and then he stuffed 2 suitcases with like every solar panel he could get his hands on, and just walked around Havana giving them to like I think a mosque and like LGBT community center, just like and like everybody we spoke to had something like that they were contributing. So it's just one of the best experiences I've had with like political organizing or activism like ever.
Well, I mean, it really was inspiring just to see from the outside. But this being something that was purposefully publicized and obviously commented on social media, there's been a lot of nonsense, and I think let's kind of talk about it a little bit here, because I think it is important, because this is how you kind of convince people that the starvation of other folks is justified, is by kind of muddying the waters. Now, this first one was about this guy. Hasan Piker. I don't know. He apparently wore a T-shirt or a button shirt that was worth $600+, which was pointed out by Cyberboy. I'm curious here. I mean, look, I think that like if you are somebody who has some money and the ability to help out, it would be a really good thing if you're spending money like that on shirts to maybe show up and help out the people of Cuba, which in fact fucking Hasan Piker did. So I don't actually understand what the criticism or point here is meant to be. I mean, could you talk a little bit about your experience and your thoughts on this kind of thing? Because we can get into the government stuff that I think a lot of folks have been pointing out, but this idea that like, oh, an American, who has some money in their pocket went out to help people who are literally suffering because of the actions of their own government. I don't really find there to be too much hypocrisy, between that and the fact that Hasan's wearing a nice stylish shirt while he's doing it.
Yeah. No, I think the absolute worst you could say about that is that it could look mildly tacky, right? But then you think there's a couple things there, because first of all, as you say, yes, Hasan's a guy with money, obviously. He is using that money. He's
man.
Like, I know he contributed quite a bit to this mission, and donations to it and helping to publicize it. He literally puts his money where his mouth is. And then it's a catch-22, right? Because if you have money and you have, as the kids say, drip, and dress well. Actually, they probably no longer say that if I know about it. If you have a kind of a slick presentation, it's one attack. You're a champagne socialist. You're a hypocrite. You're et cetera, et cetera. If it's the opposite, if you're poor, if you're broke, and you wear, the $10 shirts from Walmart, which I mostly do, it's the opposite attack. It's, you're just envious and unsuccessful and
yeah, exactly.
And driven by jealousy. So the only way that these people will be satisfied if you just like stop being a leftist whatsoever.
No, exactly. And I think that gets to the fundamental point here, which is that there is no way to kind of satisfy these kind of folks, and who gives a shit about satisfying them in the first place, because what they're trying to argue for is to do nothing. I mean, look, on the question of like, quote, champagne socialism, the reason that that's a kind of derisive term is not just like, oh, these people are enjoying nice things. It's that these people treat like the struggle of the poor as kind of like almost like esoteric, like fun ideas to debate while they're like hanging around living their nice lives. Yeah. Going out and actually helping out people is like the opposite of what, that champagne socialist, tag is supposed to imply. Champagne socialist is somebody who's detached from the actual material reality. And here's somebody actually taking on that material reality, directly, one, through donation, and two, through putting a camera to it, which was another kind of criticism that I think that many people made, which is like, oh man, they're just taking photos and videos of them doing it. If they were very serious about it, I guess they would do it in kind of silence. Could you talk about why that is just a ludicrous argument as well?
No, you've got to, the only way to do it right is you've got to wear a burlap sack and then tell nobody about it. But yeah, no, it really, that kind of criticism, like, and there's been a lot of it over the last few days, has really kind of pissed me off because, can I say pissed?
Yeah, of course. You can say whatever you want, my friend.
All right.
Within reason.
It has, because it's being done by people, at the New York Post, the Daily Mail, the Washington Post, now under Bezos. Fucking Ben Shapiro did a video about us. And these are all people who have never left the safety of their desks and risked anything for a cause they believe in. So, when they do that, maybe they can get to talk.
No, I mean, and I think that's more than a fair point. I mean, this gets to something else, a specific criticism that I would just like, to maybe hear your thoughts on. One of the main, I think, arguments has been that y'all went there, you drank a bunch of rum, you went to a concert. Yeah. The concert was so raucous and fun that it kind of sucked up all the electricity on the island. Yeah. And then y'all went back, to your 5-star hotel and were sitting in the lap of luxury. Kind of a theme here. Yeah. Could you talk about the kind of nuts and bolts and respond to that? Because I think a lot of people are hearing, and some people maybe unwittingly might even kind of fall for the kind of propaganda move that's trying to imply.
Yeah, so this has been the main attack, and this has been in like all of those tabloid papers I mentioned. I think the New York Post called it our vile communist vacation.
Sounds like a good band name.
Yeah, no, I think I opened for them. But so there's two main points here, right? There's the hotel thing and there's the kneecap thing. So on the hotel thing, we stayed in a hotel. Everybody says it was a 5-star hotel. I'm not really sure what 5-star is supposed to mean in the context of ranking Cuban hotels. The room we were in was a pretty standard room. It had 2 twin-sized beds, a desk, a toilet, definitely nicer than the average home that the Cuban people are having to live in right now. That's undeniable. But there's a reason for that, right? And it's U.S. policy. The United States, you can look this up on the State Department website, has a list of what it calls Cuba prohibited accommodations, which is any hotel owned by the Cuban government, which is virtually all of them. I think there are 4 or 5 hotels that are actually legal for Americans to stay in, and they are all what you would call 4 or 5 star. And the penalties, if you break the ban, ludicrous. The penalties, I believe, are 10 years in prison for a hotel, or a fine of $250,000 for an individual, or up to $1 million for a corporation. So there is a deliberate policy of starving the Cuban state of any tourism income and which is a hugely important sector for their economy because they're not allowed to export anything, starving them of income and empowering private businesses and trying to create a class of hotel-owning oligarchs. They want little Mar-a-Lagos all over Cuba. So we stayed at a hotel called the Iberostar Marqués de la Torre. Not, as the New York Post claimed, one of the illegal hotels, because they just completely misreported that. And it was really the only option because, the other alternative would have been what are called casas particulares, which is where you stay with an individual Cuban family and it's like an Airbnb. Mm-hmm. Not really a practical possibility when you have 130 plus volunteers.
Totally. And also, let's just be really clear here. What y'all were doing was again, just complying with the system that the United States government has put into place. So this kind of cheap, nasty, after the fact gotcha is totally ludicrous. And again, this is why we're actually going through these attacks. It's because these kind of criticisms aren't meant to help out the Cuban people or to expose left-wing hypocrisy, as willing as I am on this program to do, right? It is to make it so, doing something like what y'all did, which was making sure that children and people who are sick can have medicine, that people who are living in that country can have electricity, literally access to modern civilization. And they want to come up with reasons against that because they can't make an argument about why preventing children from getting medicine is okay. Why running an energy policy that is meaning that hospitals are getting shut down while sick people are getting treatment. There's no way that they can put that in their papers. Hey, this is why it's justified to starve the Cuban people. They have to say, oh my God, look at Hasan Piker, look at Alex, look at Nathan Robinson spending some time in a Cuban vacation. Look at these silly hypocrites. Because that's the only thing that could maybe paint some kind of positive light on their absurd position, because it is so odious and so immoral.
Yeah. No, it's all a distraction. It's all just nonsense and a big cloud of squid ink to, get away from the real issue, which is the blockade and the pain it's causing.
Mm-hmm. No, and just really quickly, just so it doesn't seem like we're avoiding it, could you speak to the kneecap, allegation as well, that the power went out because, you guys were partying too hard?
Yeah. No, this one was crazy. There was the amount of, and people should keep in mind that kneecap are from Northern Ireland. So they are under UK defamation law, and UK defamation law is very favorable to the plaintiff. So because a Florida representative, I believe it was Representative Salazar, claimed in the press that kneecap had thrown a special concert, used so much electricity that it caused a blackout, and that people had died as a result. Mm-hmm. They accused them of murder, essentially. Completely false. First of all, it was not a special concert that kneecap threw. It was a long-standing Cuban spring music festival that happens every year. Kneecap just turned up to it and did about an 8-minute set. Mm-hmm. And, it was a nice gesture, give people who are going through a terrible time, a little music, a little excitement, it was a nice thing. And there's no evidence the blackout was caused by the music festival. And it's even unclear whether or not anyone died during the blackout. Yeah. So this idea that you can accuse a group of musicians of that is really perverse.
It has the same sound as when you see people who would talk about the genocide and the starvation of the people in Gaza, and they would look through photos of people in Gaza and they would be like, well, look at that guy, he's fat. Right. Yeah. So therefore, and or look at this kid, they're eating candy. Yeah. As if the idea of a child going through something like that shouldn't be able to enjoy, a simple pleasure like that. It is totally disgusting and ludicrous, and everybody should see through it and, not fall prey to it. I don't even want to make you kind of respond to this, but there was weird things online too about folks publicizing that they were going to it, when again, the whole reason that there's media people there, the whole reason that there's journalists there is to draw attention to what's going on. I think everyone who watches this program is smart enough to see through that. Yeah. So Alex, before I let you go, I wanted to just kind of talk to you nuts and bolts. after seeing this, I mean, obviously we need to pressure the Trump administration to stop this. What is the state of play, in Cuba? I mean, do we need to kind of be worried about, kind of like governmental collapse there? I mean, what is it that you're kind of taking away from your experience there, both in your analysis of what's going on the ground and also what we should do in the United States?
Yeah, so there's a few things here, and there's a few things that people really ought to be aware of and be getting involved with. So the state of play right now is that the blockade is still ongoing. The blackouts are still happening. And right now, it looks as if Trump and Marco Rubio are making steps towards running the Venezuela playbook. They're beginning to talk about criminal indictments of Cuban leaders. We know in Venezuela that was used as a pretext to attack and to kidnap Nicolas Maduro, which is still wild that happened. So there's a very real threat of military action. What people are doing about that is that right now, several U.S. representatives, several people in the Senate have started organizing a war powers resolution against any military action, making it clear that Trump cannot attack Cuba without congressional authorization. I forget all the names, but I know Pramila Jayapal has been working on this. A few people in the Senate. So one thing that is like really useful is that you can call, email, harass your legislator, show up at their office if you're nearby, and get them on board with a war powers resolution to prevent any attack on Cuba. The other thing people can do is go to Cuba. I was shocked how easy it is. The Trump administration and the U.S. government generally, they want us to think that it's very difficult and dangerous and even illegal to go to Cuba. It is not. It's a matter of getting a few people together. Ideally, one of you would speak Spanish, and getting on a plane in Miami. There's no practical or legal reason that we can't have a large aid mission every week. I mean, we should have. There's talk already, I believe, that there's a group called there's a May Day Brigade, I believe, that's going on May 1st. You can look that up. There are organizations like the National Network on Cuba, Code Pink, which we traveled with, the Progressive International. Look all of those up. They're easy to find on social media. And then if you're international, we really need to be pressuring world governments to step in, because, it's ridiculous that it has fallen to people like me, a magazine editor, to do this work, or Hasan, a streamer. Like, this is the job of world governments, and they're failing. Canada should be sending massive amounts of aid. England, I mean, Keir Starmer's a human rights lawyer, for God's sake.
Yeah, well, fair point, but
so yeah, we just need to, get legislative pressure on that war powers resolution, and then wherever you are in the world, just as much as you can do to get aid to Cuba is what's really needed.
Yes, well, I think that's exactly where we should leave it. People should definitely look up all of these efforts, should definitely be involved. I mean, a big hope of the Trump administration right now is that people turn their eyes away. A big hope of the freaks who run organizations like the New York Post is that people, will be dissuaded from standing up for basic human rights. But we are very much appreciative of all the people who stood up, including you, Alex, and Nathan at Current Affairs. Alex Skopic is a associate editor at Current Affairs. They have some really great pieces out, How to Slander a Humanitarian Mission, and Nathan wrote a piece, Turn the Lights Back On. I'm sure there's more to come very, very soon. People should be subscribing to Current Affairs magazine for many, many reasons. Thank you so much for coming on the Jacobin Show.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me and helping highlight this. I mean, we got to get the word out.
100%. Man, really, really great to have Alex on the program. And, what they did in Cuba, I think is really inspiring. And it means something. I mean, it really does. And I think it's important to be able to take those moments and both the difficulty of what people are overcoming, but also like, man, it is a really beautiful thing to see folks looking out for one another, like the literal meaning of solidarity, something that we need much more of in this world.
Yeah, and as to all the haters that concerned trolled about it, I'll repeat what NBA players said about George Karl. When the grass is cut, the snakes will show. So.
Hell yeah. Well, y'all put your money where your mouth is. Consider supporting us here at Jacobin. We have a great new issue of the magazine, Teen Jacobin. Matt, have you flipped through your copy yet? It's a lot of fun.
I have not. I should check that out. I need to.
You'll learn some new slang. There's obviously a really good interview with Hasan, as well as Sarah Squirm. I believe Megan Day did that. It's really, really interesting to see. But no, so really, really thoughtful and really great edition of the magazine. So people should subscribe to it. It's a lot of fun. You're going to definitely want to get your hands on it. Also, please do consider subscribing right here to the Jacobin Show on YouTube, both in the normal way, but also as a paid membership. We've been talking about it. There is big expansions coming here. But to be able to allow us to do that, we're going to need the support of the audience. So if you've been a member before, maybe consider re-upping. If you haven't been, you will be able to enjoy much more from it. Not just from Matt and I's beautiful face, but from a whole host of other people. So allow us to do that. We need the subscriptions. So please do consider subscribing. We're not done yet, though. Matt, we're going to go up to the great state of Maine, where a very exciting race is ongoing. Graham Platner, I think, has been running a very unique and historic kind of campaign, one that has had a real significant capacity to do something that I'm always that I admire very much, which is to move away from kind of nonsensical distractions and culture war politics and focus on the things that mean a lot to everyday people. Obviously, we talk a lot about Taylor Ramett and how exciting that was here in Texas. What we've seen from Graham Platner's ability, to one, be able to take responsibility and to take criticism as well, but also to do it in a way that's been very productive for focusing on the things that made him run in the first place. And I would just remind people, one thing about Graham that I think is very admirable is that, like, he was somebody who, when he decided to run for office, this wasn't something that had been like a lifelong dream of his or anything like that. He was a part of a group of people who were trying to figure out how to get a kind of a labor or working class candidate to run for office in Maine. And they looked around the room and people said, you know what, Graham, you're very well spoken. You have an inspiring story. You should do it. And, this wasn't somebody who was kind of vying or pushing for it, but was actually asked by the kind of groups, by the kind of organization, by the kind of strategists that are trying to find ways to get more working class people to be in power. And it's a good thing to see. And I'm happy to see it. But it hasn't been without controversy, as most people know. And we've seen Janet Mills, who maybe, Matt, you could remind us a little bit about what she is like. Who's been on the attack against him recently. And I think probably because she's been reading the same polls that we are that are putting her at a much lower position than Mr. Platner.
Yeah, one of those polls is this Emerson College poll from this week where Graham Platner, and I'll put this up for folks. This shocked even me, who I sort of expected Platner to be in the lead, but folks who can see this, zoom in a little bit. Democratic primary poll. This is of likely Democrat primary voters. Platner is at 55%. Mills is at 28%. Janet Mills, current governor and a longtime member of the, longtime political dynasty comes from a wealthy family in Maine. Someone else at 4%, undecided at 13%. So even if Mills gets all the undecided, that puts her at 41%. So still about 15% shy of Platner. And I'll also just read some of this here. Male voters support Platner by a 41% point margin, 63% to 22%, while women support Platner by an 18-point margin, 50 to 32%.
So just across the board.
And Janet Mills has decided to go dirty, which is something that Platner has been, I think, studiously avoiding. He won't even really mention, as far as I can tell, that she's extremely old. And I'd also just mention one thing for Democrats that are viewing this purely on congressional, you don't care about ideology, you just want Team Blue to have as much power as possible. Janet Mills saying she's only going to run for this term and then leave makes this entire thing pointless. Because she's, one, not positioned to win this better than Platner is in any sense. Because not only is she down in polling, she's also not campaigning, which we're going to see. She does all her stuff through Zoom. But also, if you leave the Senate after your first term, you are, well, also she's already old. You're not going to achieve any seniority. The chance to put a 40-year-old, 40-something in the Senate that can fight for you and build that seniority should, I mean, frankly, be as much as anyone needs to say, let alone that one of them supports things like getting rid of the filibuster to enact a progressive agenda, and the other is a constitutional norms stickler, even when that comes to something like a 2024 rape kit bill, which Janet Mills vetoed. And she said, and it wasn't like some of her Mills supporters will say, to get a better bill. It was because she didn't like how it was passed and said that constitutional norms need to be respected. Now, I think maybe in a world that isn't the one we live in, that is an arguable case. But people like Chuck Schumer and Democrats have hid behind this. Remember why student loan stuff didn't get done is because of the parliamentarian.
Yeah.
And the reason Platner is winning not just men, but women by an 18-point margin is because even Democrat primary voters, who have typically been open to this sort of idea, are sick of it. They want something to get done. They've seen 2 Trump terms where he's run in and enacted his agenda. And so this whole thing of we can't do a rape kit bill because she didn't like the day it was passed on, it's too late in the session, is a non-starter. That's why you won't see her explicitly say that's why it was. So all that is to say, Janet Mills, like I said, not appearing in person anywhere, and is doing, though, Zoom calls. And let's just play a few parts of this meeting she had with some Maine voters here. And I think you kind of get the optics of this, and not to be someone who points optics.
Well, also let's also set the table that she ran a controversial ad, let's say, attack ad against Graham Platner, using some of his kind of old Reddit comments, which has been a kind of a deep mine for his opponents, something that he's now addressed multiple times in multiple places. So she's been kind of pushing that. And this is the response that she's getting from Democratic voters from these kind of attacks, which, by the way, are implying that Graham Platner is a pig, basically.
Yeah. When, Platner has apologized and even has had a pretty moving, I would say, engagement with people who now support him. Like there's one woman who came and said, like, I was really hurt to hear you say things that amount to victim blaming. And Platner not only talked to her in that moment, but has since, and now she works on the campaign. And indeed, that rape kit bill that I mentioned earlier that was vetoed by Mills in 2024, the woman who spearheaded that is now on the stump with Graham Platner.
Wow.
And thanking him for the pressure that he has put on it. And Mills, it's now law because Mills realized, I want to hit this guy as a misogynist. I better not have recently vetoed rape kit legislation. It's just the type of like cynicism that we're playing with here. But don't take it from us, the Bernie bros. Here is some folks at this Zoom town hall that Janet Mills.
Well, they're in person. She's on the Zoom.
Right, exactly. This is you'd think COVID is still like marching around the country to the point where, but yeah,
it's cold out, especially when you're a little old. It gets a little chilly.
Say that I'm a member of the Me Too generation. And I was offended by your ad, and I would very much like you to run a clean campaign. Like Joe Baldacci said, let's have a positive campaign. I don't think anybody should be attacking another Democrat right before the primary and using underhanded means and using that kind of language. Okay, I think you can talk about what what you have done has been wonderful. So speak about what you have done and don't demolish your candidate in such an underhanded way. And I'm sorry, that's not a question. That's a statement.
But I'm happy to. Turn off their mic first. Yeah. I think the voters of Maine have a right to know of the choice in front of them. They deserve to know what my opponent has said and done, and the things he deleted right before he decided to run for the U.S. Senate. Maine people know my record, and they know.
And we'll stop it there. I will just say the things that Graham deleted and has, in a sense, engaged with apologetically, pale in comparison to things you vetoed, Janet.
Yeah.
You vetoed things. You didn't. It's not deleting the posts off Reddit is not as significant of an official action as vetoing a bill on rape kits. Now, go ahead, David.
No. I mean, I just want to make a note to the listeners that one of the things that they had to do was mute the mic of the town hall because the questioner received a huge round of applause, and you would not be able to hear Governor Mills over that.
Meanwhile, Platner just this week finished his 50th town hall across Maine, and neither Mills nor Susan Collins has done a single one. And and I think we can talk about this a little bit more, but I just wanted to maybe make a large point here, which is that the point here is that there's a way of doing politics that people in this country are just sick of, right? It's just trying to find like artificial reasons to kind of like knock out a candidate because you can't beat them directly. I mean, hell, it's similar to what it is very similar to, Matt. It's what I was talking to with Alex Skopic earlier in the episode about when they were in Cuba. Oh my God, Hasan Piker is wearing a $600 shirt. Oh my God, he's got really nice glasses on. As if that's should somehow get you to say like, yeah, you know what? Those fucking kids don't deserve medicine or food, right? Because the argument and the position of the detractors of that mission, that humanitarian mission, what they want to happen is so odious. They want people to go hungry. They want the power to be out. They want the hospitals to be closed. They can't say that. So instead, it's like, oh, what if we got everybody talking about this? And most people are tired of that way of engaging in politics and in conversation in this country. And you're seeing it in politics where somebody like Graham, who, by the way, doesn't deny or hide or, directly deal with questions about his past and things like that, but, speaks to them honestly. We were like, okay, well, I trust this person. And there's nothing more mobilizing or motivating to people, especially folks in this country when it comes to a politician who's willing to do something that most of them will never do, which is hear something and change their behavior or own up to their past. So anyways, it has just been amazing to see an old way of doing politics be exposed for how ineffective it is. But anyways, let's continue here. Yeah, this next part, I was shocked. I've never seen an interaction with a politician and a voter go this poorly. Here's Janet Mills.
Go ahead. I respect the neutrality rule. I don't know what big money you're talking to. I don't have the big money here. I don't have big money from the National Party. What, are you kidding me? We were both recruited or asked to run by national Democrats. But I don't think either of us has any.
Which ones, though? Because I think there might be a difference in which national Dems. I think Graham's might be a little bit more labor-focused, and Mills might be talking about Kirsten Gillibrand and Chuck Schumer. But I'll let her continue.
Exactly.
Big money from any source.
This is unbelievable.
Governor Mills, I don't know if you can see me. I'm Mark Worth. I was the representative from Ellsworth in the 131st House of Representatives. And I'm the Minister Emeritus of the church where we're currently meeting. And by the way, I think your ads are divisive and odious. And you are doing Susan Collins' work for her. However, that's not my question. That is not my question. So when I was in the legislature, I was very disappointed about your record on tribal sovereignty and labor and gun safety bills, such as your veto of the red flag law. But what really annoyed me at that time was how you snubbed the tribes in the State of the Tribes address. Now, it was the first time in the history of the state of Maine that all 4 tribes had their chiefs represented in addressing the legislature. Congressman Golden made sure he was there. The state Supreme Court was there. The House was there. The Senate was there. You could not be bothered to walk across the street and join us. And you never gave a good explanation as to why you snubbed the tribes on that. You said you had a conflict, and we never heard what it was, and why it was so important that you had to be somewhere else. And then, of course, you vetoed the most important tribal sovereignty bills. And so I wish you would address that.
Can I answer some of this stuff? Because that's outrageous, Mark, to say I snubbed them. Listen, I've had so many meetings with the tribes, and I respect the tribes. I have personal relationships with all the chiefs of the tribes on all 5 reservations.
Trump.
Your governor, so you should. And I'll just point out something that I've heard about Maine politics is that's a reason, apart from, it takes a lot of energy to do live town halls, is she gets protested by these same tribes whose bill she vetoed in 2023, which would give them a whole bunch of sovereignty. And the reason she said was, again, these procedural things. It would be a legal nightmare. It would create so many headaches you don't understand. Let me, Janet Mills, slow walk this, and maybe 3 years from now, we'll let you do a little bit of online gambling. You'll have sovereignty over doing some online gambling. How about that? Is that enough for you? Like, there is a reason Chuck Schumer wants Janet Mills over Graham Platner. And it is not reasons that, frankly, even they want to vocalize. It's because they want the Senate to continue operating the way the Senate has always operated, which is a check on the popular will, not to empower it.
Perfectly put. Well, we will continue to be watching this race as well as other ones, including the one in Michigan, on this program. Thank all of y'all for tuning into the Jacobin Show. Thanks everybody who's been coming out to see me on the road. Again, I'll be in Brownsville just a little bit later tonight. I'll be in Dallas on Wednesday, April 1st at the Wild Detectives. You don't want to miss it. And many, many other places. But without further ado, y'all have a good rest of your weekend. We're going to be back next Friday with a deep dive into Brazilian politics and Lula. You're not going to want to miss it. So come and see us then. And everybody have a good rest of your weekend and take care.